Imagine calling for air support and then being ordered to stay as far away from it as possible. During the Vietnam War, American soldiers learned that one of their most powerful allies could also become incredibly dangerous if they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't because the aircraft was malfunctioning. It was because its firepower was so overwhelming that anyone caught inside its target zone, friend or foe, had little chance of survival. That aircraft carried an unforgettable nickname, Puff the Magic Dragon. By the mid-1960s, the Vietnam War had become a different kind of conflict. Instead of fighting large conventional armies across open battlefields, US forces found themselves battling guerrilla fighters who struck quickly, disappeared into jungles, and often attacked under the cover of darkness. Traditional fighter aircraft flew too fast to protect isolated outposts for long, and bombers couldn't always provide the precise support troops needed during nighttime attacks. Military planners needed something entirely different. They needed an aircraft that could remain above the battlefield for hours, identify enemy movements in the dark, and deliver devastating fire with remarkable accuracy. The answer came from an unlikely source. The US Air Force converted the aging Douglas AC-47 transport aircraft into one of the world's first dedicated gunships. Engineers installed three 7.62mm miniguns along its side. Instead of making repeated attack runs, the aircraft would fly in a gentle circle around its target, while the guns continuously pointed toward the center of that circle. This tactic allowed an uninterrupted stream of bullets to fall onto enemy positions with astonishing precision. At night, the effect was unforgettable. Long streams of glowing red tracer rounds poured from the aircraft, like fiery waterfalls across the jungle below. Soldiers watching from the ground said it looked as though a dragon were breathing fire through the darkness. Before long, crews embraced the nickname that would become legendary, Puff the Magic Dragon. For American troops defending isolated bases, the appearance of Puff often meant the difference between holding their position and being overrun. Small outposts scattered across South Vietnam were frequent targets of nighttime attacks. Viet Cong forces relied on darkness, surprise, and superior knowledge of the terrain. But once the gunship arrived overhead, the battlefield changed almost instantly. The AC-47 could remain on station for extended periods, illuminating enemy positions with flares while maintaining constant fire around friendly defensive lines. Instead of short bursts, its miniguns created an almost continuous wall of bullets that suppressed attackers before they could close the distance. That incredible firepower came with an important warning. Ground commanders understood that Puff's effectiveness depended on absolute coordination. The aircraft's guns covered a carefully calculated impact area. Anyone entering that zone risked being struck by thousands of rounds in only a few seconds. Friendly troops were therefore instructed to remain outside the designated engagement area unless the attack had completely ceased. This wasn't because soldiers feared the aircraft itself. They respected what it could do. Radio communication became critical whenever a gunship was called into action. Forward air controllers, ground commanders, and the aircraft crew constantly exchanged updated positions to ensure friendly units remained clear of the firing pattern. Colored smoke, signal panels, map coordinates, and carefully confirmed landmarks all helped identify exactly where American forces were located before the first burst of fire left the aircraft. Even a small navigation error could have catastrophic consequences. The crews aboard Puff carried enormous responsibility. Flying slow circles above active combat exposed them to enemy ground fire for extended periods. Unlike fast-moving jets that passed overhead in seconds, the AC-47 often remained within range of rifles and machine guns while protecting troops below. Every mission demanded steady flying, accurate navigation, and perfect communication between the cockpit and the gunners. For the soldiers on the ground, hearing the distant engines of Puff approaching through the night became a sound of reassurance. Yet they also knew the rules. Once the gunship began firing, staying clear of its deadly cone of fire was not optional. It was essential for survival. As Puff the Magic Dragon became more common over Vietnam, its reputation spread quickly through both American and enemy ranks. Soldiers defending remote fire bases often remembered the first time they saw the gunship arrive. The distant drone of its engines would grow louder. Illumination flares would drift slowly toward the jungle floor, and within moments, long streams of glowing tracers would slice through the darkness. What had seemed like an overwhelming attack could suddenly collapse into confusion. The aircraft's greatest advantage wasn't just its firepower, it was persistence. While fighter jets might have only seconds over a target before climbing away, the AC-47 could orbit above the battlefield for hours. That constant presence gave commanders time to assess changing conditions, direct fire precisely where it was needed, and respond immediately if attackers shifted their assault. The gunship's firing pattern was unlike anything most troops had ever witnessed. Because the aircraft banked continuously in a circle, its side-mounted miniguns remained locked on a single point below. Instead of scattered bursts from multiple attack passes, the bullets landed with remarkable consistency. Crews could place thousands of rounds into a relatively small area, pinning enemy forces behind trees, trenches, or embankments before they could organize another advance. This was exactly why American troops were repeatedly reminded to respect the aircraft's engagement zone. Once Puff began firing, nobody wanted friendly soldiers moving across the battlefield without clear authorization. Even experienced infantry units understood that stepping into the designated target area could put them directly into the path of one of the most intense concentrations of small arms fire ever delivered from an aircraft. The warning wasn't born from fear, it was the result of discipline and experience gained during countless combat operations. Night after night, the AC-47 proved especially valuable during attacks on isolated outposts. Viet Cong units often depended on darkness to conceal their movement, infiltrate defensive lines, and overwhelm small garrisons before reinforcements could arrive. But darkness became far less effective once the gunship appeared overhead. Powerful flares transformed black jungle into daylight, exposing movement that had been nearly impossible to detect only moments earlier. For many defenders, those brilliant white flares became almost as reassuring as the gunship's weapons. They illuminated tree lines, rice paddies, and hidden approach routes, allowing soldiers to identify threats before they reached the perimeter. Combined with the steady roar of the miniguns, the psychological impact was enormous. Former crew members later recalled that many missions were as much about preventing attacks as destroying them. Enemy fighters who realized a gunship had arrived often broke contact rather than continue advancing into its field of fire. In many cases, simply hearing the distinctive engine noise overhead signaled that the tactical situation had changed dramatically. Operating the AC-47, however, was far from safe. Its relatively slow speed and predictable circular flight path made it vulnerable to ground fire. Enemy machine guns and anti-aircraft weapons constantly searched the night sky for opportunities to strike the aircraft. Every orbit exposed the crew to additional danger, yet remaining overhead was essential if troops below were to receive continuous protection. Inside the aircraft, teamwork was everything. Pilots maintained the precise banking angle needed to keep the guns on target, while navigators monitored the orbit and corrected for wind, altitude, and terrain. Gunners carefully controlled bursts to maximize effectiveness while avoiding unnecessary ammunition waste. Radio operators stayed in constant communication with commanders on the ground, updating target information and confirming friendly positions as the battle evolved minute by minute. Those communications became even more critical when fighting occurred close to American lines. Battlefield conditions changed rapidly. Friendly patrols could reposition, wounded soldiers might need evacuation, or reinforcements could arrive unexpectedly. Every adjustment required careful coordination before another burst of fire could safely begin. The success of the AC-47 soon demonstrated that the gunship concept had enormous potential. Military planners realized they had created something far more valuable than an emergency solution for Vietnam. They had introduced an entirely new way of providing close air support, one capable of remaining over friendly forces for extended periods while delivering accurate, sustained fire whenever it was needed most. That realization would eventually lead to even more powerful aircraft, but none would ever carry quite the same legendary nickname as the one that first turned the night sky over Vietnam into a wall of blazing red tracer fire. As the Vietnam War continued, the success of the AC-47 proved that the gunship concept was far more than a temporary experiment. Commanders had discovered an aircraft capable of doing something no conventional fighter or bomber could accomplish. It could remain over a battlefield for extended periods, support troops through the darkest hours of the night, and deliver accurate, sustained fire exactly where it was needed. But the battlefield was changing. Enemy forces gradually introduced heavier machine guns and more sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons. While the AC-47 had been revolutionary, it was based on an aging transport aircraft with limited speed, armor, and payload. To survive in increasingly dangerous airspace, the Air Force needed a more capable generation of gunships. The lessons learned from Puff the Magic Dragon directly influenced the development of the AC-119 Shadow, and later the far more powerful AC-130 Spectre. These newer aircraft carried larger weapons, improved sensors, stronger engines, and advanced night vision technology. They could identify targets with greater accuracy and engage them from safer distances while remaining true to the same basic principle that had made the AC-47 so effective. Continuous, precise fire delivered while orbiting above the battlefield. Yet despite these technological advances, veterans often remembered the original AC-47 with a special sense of respect. For many American soldiers, the distinctive rumble of its engines meant hope during some of the war's most desperate moments. Isolated outposts under attack frequently fought for hours before hearing the familiar sound approaching through the darkness. Once Puff arrived, defenders knew experienced crews were overhead, carefully coordinating every burst of fire with troops on the ground. That trust had been earned through discipline. The warnings given to soldiers about staying clear of the gunship's firing area were never signs that the aircraft was unpredictable. In fact, the opposite was true. Puff's fire was devastating precisely because it was deliberate, controlled, and concentrated. Friendly forces respected its engagement zone for the same reason artillery units respected their own danger areas. Everyone understood that extraordinary firepower demanded extraordinary coordination. Stories from Vietnam repeatedly describe how radio operators calmly relayed updated positions, while commanders confirmed maps, landmarks, and defensive lines before requesting another orbit. Every transmission reduced the risk of tragedy and increased the effectiveness of the aircraft, supporting them overhead. It was a constant reminder that modern warfare depended as much on communication as it did on weapons. The aircraft also left a lasting psychological impression. For many enemy fighters, the sudden appearance of brilliant illumination flares, followed by endless streams of red tracer rounds, signaled that surprise had vanished. Night, once their greatest advantage, became their greatest vulnerability. The jungle that had concealed movement only moments earlier was transformed into a brightly lit battlefield where every advance could be seen from above. More than half a century later, Puff the Magic Dragon remains one of the most recognizable aircraft of the Vietnam War. Its nickname has become part of military history, symbolizing a remarkable combination of innovation, courage, and tactical adaptation. Although later gunships surpassed it in speed, technology, and firepower, they all owed a debt to the pioneering crews who proved the concept under combat conditions. The legend of Puff was never about a mythical dragon. It was about ordinary airmen and soldiers adapting to an extraordinary war. Their coordination, discipline, and determination created a weapon system that changed close air support forever and helped shape every American gunship that followed. So were US soldiers really told to stay away from Puff the Magic Dragon? Yes, but not because they feared the aircraft itself. They stayed clear because when Puff opened fire, it unleashed one of the most devastating and concentrated streams of bullets ever delivered from the sky. Respecting that deadly zone wasn't a sign of fear. It was the difference between becoming a casualty and surviving the night. In the end, Puff the Magic Dragon didn't just rewrite the rules of aerial warfare in Vietnam. It proved that sometimes the safest place on the battlefield was behind the firepower of an ally you knew well enough never to stand in front of.